So, again, my name is Hjalti Danielsson, or CCP Abraxas. I write most of the Eve Chronicles these days. I also wrote a play, staged reading, that's going to be shown tomorrow at 4 p.m. in Tranquility. I'm also on the storyline team. I take part in deciding sort of the embassy storyline for Eve Online. And I wrote a novel, and it was a lot of fun. That is coming out early next year. And I'm going to hold a lecture on fiction writing in general. But before the lecture, I'm going to do a quick read from the novel. This is probably from the gloomiest chapter in the entire novel. It takes place among the Sanchez Nation pirate faction. The backstory of this thing is that some of the main characters in the book are agents of the Sisters of Eve rescue faction, including the protagonist, the hero, who's called Drem. And Drem, along with his team, Yemen, Verena, and Ortak, who are all Sisters of Eve rescue agents, have been working on rescuing people from Sanchez Nation, from being claimed by the sort of Borg-esque Sanchez Nation. And Drem himself has also been working on a secret plan that involves the Sancha. And when this chapter starts, they've been invited to a Sancha research colony where a Sancha representative intends to talk to them about what they're doing. And their ship has just gotten to the colony, or is just getting to the colony. As they hovered into the hangar's mouth, Drem thought how odd it was that he had never landed on a fertile planet. He'd been to countless colonies in his time, from tiny things that barely had enough rock to stand upon, to massive moons, where even in areas that were devoid of artificial gravity, you were still held firmly in place, locked down, forever. Just once, he thought, he would like to stand with his bare feet on something that was meant to hold life. Whatever that would be, it wouldn't happen here. There had not even been an auto-generated voice welcoming them to what was otherwise a gigantic colony. They had sent a docking request, and the welcome had been the opening of hangar doors. This place would not receive unexpected visitors. They had passed through an acceleration gate, shunted forth by technology they did not understand, towards a place they could not prepare for. They had weapons on their ship, but decided not to bring them. Whatever they faced in this parasite of silver and metal, and the colony nearly encapsulated the entire moon, Drem realized in horrified amazement. It might be amenable to reason, but hardly to gunfire. As they disembarked, the first thing everyone noticed was the decrepitation. There was dust everywhere, debris on floors, and disconnected or torn wires that were dangling from the walls. From what little the ship's onboard scanners had been able to tell them, this was a research facility, but it was clear that not many visitors had come here on their own volition. Another hangar not too far from them, a much wider area that was meant for industrial-sized ships carrying large amounts of cargo, was spotlessly clean. And also, Drem noticed with a grimace, filled with equipment that looked very much of a containment persuasion. They passed on a long hall. Nobody spoke. They had their hazard suits on, mostly from habit and a needed feeling of safety, but the helmets were open and they breathed in the unfiltered local air. Everyone agreed they did not want to risk being unidentifiable in the face of the mindless. And Drem was privately relieved that Verena wouldn't be able to talk to him on private channels. The dust faded away as they went further in, and the wires clung onto the walls. There were more of them, sealed and fastened, rows upon rows that connected everything like veins in a body. Some of those wires terminated in immobile sensors that seemed completely inert and inactive, as dangerous things tend to be. Drem had no doubt the Sancha knew they were there. The hall, wide enough to let the group walk side by side many times over, retained its size as they crossed the threshold into the main square, But what would have been a thronged core of activity in any other faction was a deathly quiet expanse among the Sancha. Hangar windows gave way to multi-stacked floors on either side, each the height of 2 men, that were dotted with what looked like innumerable entryways, open doors that led into shadows. It was like a beehive in winter. They walked on, their feet thumping on the metal floors. Drem could not keep from glancing up at the openings all around him. There couldn't possibly be this many pathways into the station, he reasoned, so these had to be closed-off chambers. He kept looking. He saw no movement. A quiet thought at the back of his head, remembering the carnage of his past rescue missions, reminded him that this did not indicate lack of life. Drem, someone behind him whispered, and he saw it. In one chamber, then in the other. So inert, he detected them almost as much by movement of air and dust around their forms. Sancha's army, the true slaves. There was one in every chamber. Most of them were almost completely hidden in shadows, but if you knew that they were there, if you knew what you were looking for, the subtle curves and outlines of mechanized humans could be made out. Drem knew that if he were to put his overhead into action, it would be lit up with hundreds, maybe thousands of the quietly burning points of life all around him. As they passed on, the halogen glare from the misty roofs reached them at last. They saw faces now, half human, glinting in the light, covered like the moon was covered. Every one of them looked down on the team with dead sockets that only sometimes held human eyes. To their relief, the blueprint directed them down a side corridor, still with the same high ceiling and walls that remained fairly white, but far from the agoraphobia of the hives. They came upon a body, sprawled face down close to the wall. It was larger than a man should be. The modifications that covered its body made it hard to tell where the metal gave way to flesh. Yaman nudged it with his foot. It barely shifted. The dead are heavy, after all. Drem wondered if it had been directed here, on some mission that had not ended when this unit lost contact with the hive mind, but merely transferred onto the next available body. This one left here and forgotten. Or perhaps the person, it had to be a person on some level, he thought, had stumbled in here to die, like some great beast operating on orders that were older than any technology, wandering off the beaten path for the final endless journey. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even hear the rumbling at first. It came up from another corridor, the one that passed without noticing. He turned, and when he saw it, he ran. There was no time to yell. The thing chasing them was a massive metal heap, like a ball of screeching anger. It smashed into a side wall, careened off, and hurtled in their direction, the lights on its carapace glowing like vast, angry eyes. The team conserved its breath, keeping panic at bay and focusing on running. Behind them, they heard the twangy crashes as the metal monster tore cords off the walls and sheared through hardened metals as it hurtled towards them. They came to a fork, 2 side paths that veered off the main one. "Split! I'm center!" Drem yelled. Ortag and Yaman went down the right side, Reen on the left, and he kept running straight on. A tearing noise that sounded like a scream went off behind them. Drem Rista looked over his shoulder and saw the thing shoot out something like a metal wing, leaving fist-thick grooves in the walls as it tried to slow for a turn. He stopped and caught himself thinking, no, as it flew off down the left corridor, after Verena. Drem jittered on the spot, thinking fast, then ran back and headed down the corridor, after his lover and the monster between them. At a distance, he saw the metal thing propel itself forward, and in front of it, glimpsed through its wildly careening turns, was the running Verena. Beyond both of them, Drem saw with an acid panic, was a wall. Wherever this corridor led to, it had been sealed off. He saw Verena slow a little in her run, looking frantically at the sides, but there was nothing she could climb. He cursed himself to the end of the world and back for not having brought the weapons, and frantically went through his gear as he ran, trying to think of something to use. His hands closed on an object his mind told him was important, and for a precious second he tried to think what it was before he realized he was clutching a bomb, the spoke bomb the bomb that would dig through walls. "Toss it!" he screamed as loud as his lungs would let him. "Toss your spoke!" He was closing in on the monster, and beyond its metal bulk, he saw Verena pull out a spoke bomb, turn it to narrow focus, and throw it at the wall they were rapidly approaching. The explosion rattled the teeth in his exposed head. Metal shards flew all over, leaving a dent in the wall, a tiny hole with nothing on the other side but metal, a waiting place for execution. The thing massed against the wall just as Verena dove into the opening, barely missing her. Dram grabbed one of the metal pieces and hurled it edge first at the metal monster, but the piece merely bounced off its bulk. It backed up, then crashed into the wall again, leaving a deep dent. Verena crouched inside that dent, kneeling with her head in her hands. Dram screamed in anger, tossing his spoke bomb at the thing as it prepared for another onslaught. The bomb hit, attached, and blew the monster's metal back wide open. Dram ran up to it with bloody murder on his mind, but when he saw what was inside, his legs nearly gave out, his body feeling like someone had punched him in the gut. Inside the shell, now exposed like the undeveloped embryo in a cracked egg, was a small body. It mewed at them, its voice gurgling as if liquid had seeped into its small lungs. The machine was much taller than Drem, but this thing inside it was the size of a 6-year-old child. Its body, which seemed boneless, and was nearly boneless, Drem realized with a shudder, had been fitted and shaped to conform with the machine, whose innermost crevices it filled like liquid would fill a mold. He walked up to it and crouched down. Its eyes saw him, and it moved, pistons shuddering as parts of its body designed to be immovable tried to reach for him. It revolved inside its housing on something resembling a small gyroscope, and in the infinite moment that followed, Drem understood at last what the Sancha were. It tried to hug him. Its pistoning hands reached out and it tried to touch his face. A patter in the distance resolved to two slaves running in unison. Behind them, they tugged a machine that hovered over the ground. They attached the two, the metal shell with the creature inside, slowly dragged across the ground until it was locked in a magnet embrace with a hovering creation. There was a loud hum and the machine gyrated, turning the shell upwards. It was a transport for rogue units. They wheeled it away, still mewling. When Verena crawled out of the hole at last, she took Drem into her arms and held him there as they sobbed. And that was it for the reading. The book is about 112,000 words, I think. There's fun stuff as well. It's not all gloomy. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. Excellent. Thing is, I have this presentation ready, and there's also notes in it, but we're not able to show you guys only the slides and not the notes, which really doesn't matter because the notes are just what I'm going to say to you, so I'm going to look really clever. But let's see how it goes. All right. This is a lecture about what I've learned about how to write fiction. It is not everything you could possibly learn about writing fiction, and it's just my approach to it. So anything you hear here tonight that you can use for your own writing, do it. If it makes sense to you, great. If it doesn't, that's totally fine. The presentation is in 3 parts. It covers, as you can see, the writer's lifestyle, attitude, and the writer's job. The writer's lifestyle is really just kind of how to read and what to read. It's not how to sit in a coffee house with a beret and a cigarette and write short stories on your Apple computer, or how to drink to excess, although I'm sure that could be a lot of fun as well. The lecture does not cover writing e-fiction. You can apply the things you see here in the next hour to writing e-fiction if you like, but it's not constricted solely to that. Unfortunately, it does not cover role-playing, neither in MMOs or pen and paper. Role-playing really is fascinating, but operates by different narrative rules than pure prose fiction does, and is complex enough that it's really outside the scope of what I'm going to go into in the next hour. Doesn't cover the storyline. For that, you have the storyline panel Friday, 3 o'clock p.m. and also another one, I think, at 1 o'clock on Saturday. There's a lot of things going on with the storyline, which is great. And obviously, it's not going to be conclusive and final. Again, this is my experience. I've written so far 80 chronicles, 80 short stories of varying lengths, and I have about a dozen more waiting in the pipeline. I've written 2 plays, I've written a novel, written a bunch of sort of in-game content and fiction. This is what I picked up along the way. I also wanted to talk about things that you may not see mentioned that often. Everyone who does a bit of writing knows about, show, don't tell, or tell the truth, or so on. But as far as I'm concerned, the most important rules of writing are to be kind, have fun, and keep doing it. Yeah, this is me. I've been with Eve for over 6 years. I worked in customer support for 3 years. I started in customer support when Eve was still in beta. The reason I say I've been with Eve for over 6 years and not with CCP is because at that time, customer support was outsourced to the Icelandic telecom company, which has a charming name, Siemens. And eventually the customer support department was sort of bought out and brought over to CCP, and we've been there ever since. And I've been writing the chronicles for 3 years now. And as I mentioned, I've done 80 chronicles at this point. We publish a new chronicle every 2 weeks, and for the last 3 years I've written almost but not all of them. So a new short story every 2 weeks. And 2 one-act plays, including one called The Silver Twin that you're going to see tomorrow, that we had entirely too much fun rehearsing. And an Eve novel, along with all sorts of content and proofreading projects. I've written in-game missions, item descriptions, I've proofread things and so on. I'm certainly not the only person who's done all that. We have a lot of very, very talented creators and writers at CCP. But if you work in a certain field within the company, you tend to get pulled on all sorts of different projects. Starting off, the writer's lifestyle. You should read a lot if you want to write fiction. Even if you don't write it with the intent of getting it published or making money, you should always be reading. You should read a lot, and you should read in all genres, so long as you are a little choosy. I don't keep as much up with like the most famous names as I should. I try my best, but there's a lot of them. But I try to keep an eye on what's happening around sort of on the edges. You walk into any bookstore that has a science fiction and fantasy section, you'll see names like Alistair Reynolds and Richard Morgan, all those guys who are incredibly talented. You need to read all of them. But there are other writers in other genres that you may not be aware of, and you should always be looking for someone interesting, someone new, something cool that you should read, because some of the best things you will read and learn from, you will find in places you might not have expected it. I'm just going to go over a few examples of the authors that I greatly admire and read all the time. and that make me look totally indie because I know all their names. Slipstream, for example, Jonathan Carroll, who is like the one magical realism writer not born in South America, and Holland Ellison, who is just a giant in the field. He's written over, I think, 14 or 1500 short stories, and some of them are amazing. You should read children's lit. You should not have any prejudice against the genres you read, and there's incredibly good stuff in all of them. Diane Wynne Jones wrote Howl's Moving Castle. Margot Lanigan wrote a recent book called Tender Morsels that is probably one of the darkest children's books you will ever read. There's fantasy. Gene Wolfe is an absolute master of the craft, and Kelly Link has been doing really interesting things as well. Science fiction I hardly need to tell you about. These are just a few guys doing different things in their own corners. There's horror as well. Brian Hodge isn't that really well known. He's I'd say, for people who like Clive Barker, you might like Brian Hodge. If you like Lovecraft, and if you always wanted him to be a sort of bit more existential, read Thomas Ligotti. And so on. Jim Thompson wrote absolutely brutal crime fiction. And you should also read as much of the classics and sort of general lit as you possibly can. And there's a really important point to be made here, which is that you should not read stuff if it bores you. If if you don't like Moby Dick or The Scarlet Letter or whatever else it is, put it down and find something else. Because life's really too short once you're out of high school to read books that aren't for you or that are boring you. And there's a lot of authors, especially the ones in what's called, the literature genre, that you may not even like at a certain time of your life. You might pick them up 20 years later and then go, hey, this is really cool. So check those out. Always be on the lookout in all genres for something interesting. Check out the awards as well, especially the genre awards, Hugo's, Nebula's, World Fantasy Awards. There's a lot of really talented people doing a lot of cool things that get nominated for these awards. Not just reading, you should really, if you want to be a good writer, take in all the media you can, but just don't overdo it. These are the obvious. Watch all the TV you like, watch all the movies you want. Pay attention to narrative and how it's created and how it's constructed. Pay attention to the dialogue and so on. Just don't assume that watching, TV series for hours and hours and hours on end is the equivalent to writing, because it's not. It might teach you a lot, but it's not enough. What's really interesting about media is the new. You can learn a lot of things, especially new things, from playing games, as we've all seen. You play Eve, there's a lot of interesting new kind of narrative techniques being tried out in games. The things we're doing in Eve with the storyline team, trying to sort of present the storyline to you in various ways, whether it's through in-game missions or chronicles or so on, are really things you're not going to see done anywhere else. And they can really give rise to sort of new narrative techniques that you can then use in prose fiction. Not only that, but to me, all I need to do to think of new ideas for chronicles is just to play the game. Some of the sort of best or most demanding ideas I get, the ones that demand to be written into chronicles, are the ones I get when I just fly over to some space station or a research facility, pleasure hub or something, and look at it and wonder who lives in there. What kind of people will live in this place? How are their lives? How are they connected to Capsuleers? How do they see the rest of us? How could this work? You fight against the Sansa, you fight against the Blood Raiders, and all the rest. And they're there to be shot at, certainly. But if you stop for a moment and think, how would a society based on the concept of people going into space to kidnap others and drain their blood, how would that actually work? How would it feel to be a person who lives in that society? The first chapter of the novel I wrote, which is called The Burning Life, by the way, starts with Drem, the person I just read about, who eventually joins the Sisters of Eve, starts with him dealing with the death of someone very close to him. Drem and this person are part of the Blood Raiders. And the first chapter goes a little bit into how it feels to live in their society. And then there's the web. Tons of information. There are lots of good blog, lots of information. But, you know, when I'm writing, I don't even dare open up Wikipedia. I don't. I seriously, if I need someone to research like the layout of a chapel or where this particular kind of cloth originated from, I walk over to some other department and ask them to check it out for me, because I don't dare spend what I want to be 15 minutes and what's going to end up being half a day browsing through page after page on Wikipedia. It's just too tempting. And along the way, always read. Read as much as you can. I think most people should be able to get through a book per week. I mean, a lot of the people in this room could probably easily outdo that, read 2 or 3 or 4, or however much. But this is doable, and you should always be reading. And you should just be on the lookout everywhere for interesting stuff. But be a little choosy about it. Stay alert to where you might find it, where you might find new narrative techniques and so on. There's a conversation in Burning Life that I wrote where the speech patterns are based on a dialogue I heard in an episode of Top Gear. And it just fits so perfectly with what I wanted the characters to say that I went, hey, this is going to work. Ding, ding, ding. So, thank you, Jeremy Clarkson. You should be awake, you should be alert for the nuts and bolts and everything you read and everything you watch. Keep an eye out for patterns and phrases and interesting words, you know. You don't have to write it down, you don't have to memorize it, but if something catches your attention, try to remember it, and maybe it'll pop it later on. This is fairly easy to do. You listen to an interesting conversation and you just go, oh, that's kind of cool. What's a little harder to do is keeping an eye on the sort of larger scheme things, pacing and narrative and themes. What's this whole movie about? Where are they going with this? How do they construct this so it got from A to B, from beginning to end? This may require you to watch something more than once or read it more than once, and you should not do that unless you're actually enjoying reading or watching it more than once. Like I said, the 3 big rules are be kind, have fun, and keep writing. If you're not having fun while you're doing this, if you're not having fun analyzing something, don't do it. If you don't enjoy reading a book, then don't do it. You should be open-minded. You can find interesting sources of narrative techniques pretty much anywhere. And you should definitely listen to what other people have to say about the works you've enjoyed. But don't let anyone tell you to like or not like something. It is really easy sometimes to find the flaws in things. And they could be really interesting, really educational, but you should not assign any kind of emotional weight to it. If you enjoy something and you see an instance where someone has a weird turn of phrase or something doesn't quite work out, understand it for what it is, remember not to do it yourself, and then just sort of move on, enjoy the rest of the work. Excuse me. That sort of ties into the writer's attitude. Remembering these, be kind, have fun, and keep writing. The first one sounds really weird. I know. Especially to be kind sounds weird, especially to Eve players. This may be a new concept at all. It means you should try to understand what you're experiencing, the whatever you're reading or watching, but not judge it too harshly. When you're writing, you should try to make your characters as realistic as you can, and that means seeing them from the inside. Everyone has a reason for doing what they do, even if that reason may be completely unpalatable to other people in that same novel or the same story. You have to know why your characters are doing what they're doing, even if you loathe the fact that they're doing it. If you don't, if you look at them from the outside, then you're going to start judging them, and the reader is going to notice that. He's going to notice that you're not explaining these characters to him as if they were real people. You're just using them kind of as tools to get your point across. That's dangerous. And remember that the stories you write, the fiction you create, is basically the story of things going wrong. Your characters are going to have major crises, and they're going to make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes they're going to be their fault, sometimes they're not. But you should always strive to have your characters react realistically to whatever it is that went wrong, in what they say, in how they act, and what they do. Doesn't mean they need to be nice about it. Doesn't mean they can't break down and do really crazy things or react in strange ways. And don't tell the reader how he should feel about those acts, about those events, and about how the characters reacted to them. Leave your own values out of the story. This is really hard to do. In good part because when you're writing, half the time when you're writing to make sense of the world. You have something that bugs you or something that interests you, and you're writing to explore that concept and try to figure out how it worked. But the other half of the time, you're trying to explain to other people an attitude or an idea or an opinion that you already hold, and you're using your characters to do this. It's perfectly normal to do that, but try not to be didactic about it. You know, allow yourself sometimes, at least every now and then, to write characters whose values conflict completely with your own, and don't make them into totally bad guys. They can make mistakes like everyone else, and they can do nasty things like everyone else, but don't make them into the bad guys and the ones that agree with you into the good guys, because the reader is going to notice. On that note, you should be explaining, not dictating to your readers. You should always give them the information they need to have. If you get a bad guy in your story and he needs to do a bad thing so your hero can come and kick his ass, that's fine. But he did that bad thing for some reason. The one thing I love doing in the Chronicles more than anything else is having what is, in my opinion, good people do bad things for what they think are totally good reasons. It makes the fiction come more alive, at least to me. It's a lot more fun. It presents interesting new opportunities for what your characters are actually doing. So make sure the reader knows why whatever is happening happened, what motivation each person had. Don't leave out information just because it might make your hero look a bit like a jerk. And on the same note, tell the reader all the secret stories, but do it without recrimination, and allow the reader to form an opinion. You're definitely going to have an opinion on what your characters did and why they did it and who was right and who was wrong. At least most of the time you probably will. The reader also will as well. If you're lucky, or, you know, he might agree with you or not. But it's not your job necessarily to order him or to make him agree with you. You can kind of guide him in certain ways. You can have certain opinions. The most recent chronicle I published is called The Man of Values and Faith. It takes place in the Amatar Mandate. The Amatar Mandate is basically a bunch of Minmatar people who cooperated with the Amar Empire when the Amar Empire came over to enslave everyone. And through a series of events, the Amatar Mandate is now under control of a man called Leonis Arisapur, who is doing good things. He represents the people who sort of enslaved them, but he's coming and he's built schools and he's built hospitals and he's doing a lot of good things for him. But the story itself is told from the viewpoint of a Minmatar on that planet who disagrees with these things. He says it's wrong to do these things even though they're good because they're being done for bad reasons. So this guy, this Minmatar guy, who's seen Arisapur come in and build schools and help people, he's going to start bombing them. He's going to start messing things up as much as he possibly can. And he truly believes in what he's doing. I don't know if I do. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I like to write that sort of thing and throw it out to the readers, and if they disagree with me, great. At least then it touched a nerve. Excuse me. Some common mistakes that I've seen or that I've made more often. Again, good people can do really bad things. It's fun to write about good people doing bad things because then they get a bit of a bad conscience about it. They try to make it better, but then inadvertently they make it worse instead. The story keeps moving. Everything just goes all to hell. Maybe at the end of it, they'll pull out and manage to fix things. Maybe they won't. This one, you should also be careful of whenever you're writing anything. Nobody says pirates come. They just don't. And even if you're like a captain on a ship and you're saying attack these guys, you're not gonna do that. You're also not gonna do the sort of mad wizard kind of thing. If you're writing a piece of fiction, it's a good rule of thumb is if you can stand up in a crowd or among the people you're working with and read the dialogue out loud and not feel horrendously embarrassed, it's fine. If you can't, you may need to rewrite. Dialogue does so much. It is more than anything else a window into your characters. Plus, it moves the action forward. It keeps things lively. It creates conflict. It has to do so much, so you should pay a lot of attention to it. And the reader is also going to pay a lot of attention to it. He's going to notice if it isn't quite working. He's going to notice if it feels like your characters are characters instead of actual human beings. And again, shake things up a little bit. Have your bad people do good things and vice versa. Everyone's right in their own mind. Everyone has a perfectly justifiable reason for doing whatever it is they did, even if it's blowing up a planet. Second rule in writing, have fun. You could also, I was thinking about calling this one "Don't Take It Too Seriously" or "Don't Take Yourself Too Seriously," because that's kind of like a risk of the trade. But just have fun. You should always have fun with what you're doing. This makes me sound like a bit of a hippie, but you should always write because you're having fun. You should try not to write out of anger or negativity, and certainly not out of anger at something someone else wrote. If you read something, sooner or later, if you read enough things, you're going to read something that really pisses you off. Either because it was really badly written, or because the opinions that you saw expressed in that piece don't agree with your own, or maybe just because it's the same thing as you've seen from that author or that genre over and over and over again, and it's annoying you that nobody's innovating or whatever else. And if it inspires you, if any of those reasons inspire you to write something new, that's great, but they should only inspire you. They should not drive you through it. Writing something, especially something the size of a novel, is a long, arduous slog. It's made easier if you have talented editors like I do, but it's still like a lonely, tiring thing to do. It can be a lot of fun, but if the only reason you're doing it is because you don't like what somebody else wrote, you're not going to have a good time. An example of an author who got this right, in my opinion, is a guy called Philip Pullman, who wrote a trilogy called His Dark Materials. The Amber Spyglass, The Subtle Knife, and The Golden Compass, I think it was. He wrote those 3 books as a kind of reaction to C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicles, which are very heavily Christianized children's books. Pullman didn't like the message that he saw in Lewis's books, so he wrote some of his own that are, if not atheist, then they certainly are kind of anti-religious establishment. But when you read certainly the first book in the trilogy, you can also just see how much fun Pullman's having with the whole thing. He invented this whole sort of kind of a new mythology, these spirits, these shadows, they follow you around. If he'd only written that novel as a polemic, as a reaction to Lewis's Narnia Chronicles, and not as a fun story in his own right, it would not have been popular. People would not have liked to read it. But he put a lot of thought into it and a lot of joy, and he pulled it off really well. It is going to be a slog. It's a lot of fun when it goes well. When it's not going well, you're gonna wish your muse existed so you could stab her in the face. It as long as you're enjoying it, not just those sort of few fleeting transcendental moments where everything fits, but also the ones where it feels like you're just trying to run through mud, then it's gonna go great. Now, ideals are pretty nice, and so is money. You're always going to be influenced by some outside force. It may be your publishers, your editors, your readers, whatever it is. That's absolutely normal and healthy and part of the business. It's, as far as I know, incredibly rare that a writer does what he does without any kind of outside influence that in some way restricts him, even if it's only in the form of, delete this sentence or you should write more about this character and so on. Having fun with writing means making it your own whenever you can and learning how to work with the restrictions that you have. Also, the more you write, the more you start to notice what other writers are doing with their books. And I don't know how writers' egos are in general, but I'm pretty sure there's a strong tendency to look at other people's work and compare it to your own. And that's perfectly normal. But if you read something by someone else that you sort of really dislike, that you think just isn't a good story or a book or whatever, and it nonetheless sells better than your own or gets read more than your own, that's totally fine. Those readers might like your stuff as well or not. Likewise, you're sometimes going to read stuff by other writers that is so good that it just makes you want to quit. You're just like, he just wrote the most perfect book or the most perfect story possible. I'm never going to rise to that level. I might as well, take up gardening instead. And think of it as something to aspire to, the writing, not the gardening, I mean, rather than being afraid of it. I love the fact that there's writers out there doing way better work than I probably ever will, because it's so much fun to read and it's so much fun to learn from them. And on that note, if you write anything and if you publish it, people are going to criticize you. Sometimes you can agree with them, sometimes you're not. Sometimes they're going to phrase it in ways you really wish they hadn't. And that's fine as well. If they have valid criticisms about your work, that's great. Take it in and just ignore the rest. Like I said, it's easy to find flaws in something. It's not so easy to avoid those flaws when you're writing yourself. This is just a side note that everyone should keep in mind. It'll help you through hard times. This is the third rule. After be kind, which just means understand your characters, understand what you're doing, don't assign value judgment to it, and have fun, which explains itself. Getting it done. Keep writing. Don't stop writing. Keep writing. No matter how much you hate whatever you're writing and think it's not going to be worth reading by anyone, just keep doing it. The more you write, I think the harder it gets to really have a sense for whether your story is going to be appreciated by someone else. I've written chronicles that I thought, okay, this was pretty good. I could do better, but people might like it, and I published them, and everyone was like, yes, that was awesome. That's the best chronicle I read from you in ages. And then I published something else like 2 weeks later that I thought, okay, they're going to love this, and there's just like crickets and tumbleweeds and nobody caring at all and nobody noticing all that symbolism and cool stuff I hit in the story. And it's totally heartbreaking, but you just move on. You keep writing, you find the joy in it. Whatever you can do to get it done, do that. If that means bragging about a story you're gonna finish, so that, setting public goals. If that helps you, then do it. If telling someone else so that they're gonna make fun of you if you don't finish your story, or in my case, fire me. If that works for you, excellent. Find the right setting as well. This came up at the roundtable we had on fiction writing earlier today, and someone was asking me about, how do you write? What's your sort of writing area like? And I said I wrote a novel in 4 months, surrounded by arguing game designers, sitting in the middle of a floor. I just played really loud music in my headphones, because that's what works for me. Some people like to write in silence. Sometimes people like to write in coffee houses with a lot of white noise around. If it works for you, great. Anything that keeps you writing. Likewise, some people need to write for long stretches at a time. They just need like a block of 6 hours to keep writing. Other people multitask or do a bit of writing on the way to work, or as I used to do, at work. I used to write stories while I was working in customer support. And when I got hired as a writer for Eve, it took me a long time to stop minimizing windows whenever my boss walked by, because I didn't want him to see that I was writing a story. If you want to write a novel, if you want to write something that is going to take you months and months and months, no matter how fast you work, it's sometimes going to be hard to motivate yourself, because maybe you can only sit down for half an hour at a time. Maybe you can only, do your writing in certain environments that aren't really conducive to writing. But it all adds up. It really does. I had another point I wanted to make about this. I can't remember what it was. When I wrote the chronicles that got me hired as a writer for Eve, most of which I wrote off duty, by the way. I didn't write all the stuff as a GM. But I was working full-time in customer support on swing shifts, work in the day, work at night, and so on. I was also finishing a computer science degree in the local university through distance learning. And I just wrote at night. I decided how much sleep I could do without, and then I used that time to write. It wasn't a lot, but it allowed me to finish enough stories that eventually, after a lot of persistence and a lot of badgering, CCP's content department said, okay, we'll pay you to do this stuff. You should, like I said, read books that inspire you, read books that you think, oh, this is so good, this makes me want to be a writer, because I want to have the same effect on other people as this book had on me. And you should also, every now and then, just read something that's just utter shit. There is a book that I'm not going to name that I bought many, many years ago at a flea market, just because I like the cover. It's a horror novel. And I think it won an award back then. And it's one of my favorite books, because it's so funny. It is so funny. It's so badly written, and the dialogue is so terrible, that I was in tears before I was through the first chapter. I lent it to a bunch of my friends, and it's done the rounds at CCP. And I thought, when I read that book, if this guy can get published for writing something like this, then I've got a shot. I hope that no one's going to feel the same way when my novel comes out, but if you do, then I won't hold it against you, Nobody should be afraid of competition. If you read a chronicle that I wrote, you think I could do better, do it. Absolutely. I will love you for it. There's this needs a bit of a preface. There is a kind of a lifestyle, or kind of an idea of a lifestyle, that I've seen crop up a lot of times with writers, that we're these, kind of precious, vulnerable, fragile beings that drink a lot, and that should have a certain kind of attitude and lead a certain kind of life. And it's fine if you consider yourself a writer, then you are, but there's a few things that I think everyone who wants to write for a living or writes a lot really should keep in mind. We don't deserve any kind of special dispensation. We really don't. You know, if you write, it's great. If you can affect people emotionally through that, that's perfect. It doesn't mean you can miss your deadline. It really doesn't. It also doesn't mean you can have writer's block at will. There's no such thing as writer's block. There's having accidentally made the wrong approach to your work, and then there's a lot of rewriting and experimentation. But writer's block as a concept is not a reason for the working writer. It's an excuse. If you can't figure out why a certain story isn't working, take it to pieces and put it back together again. This is actually not true, because writing is a calling. Writing is something people tend to do, even despite whatever else they have to get done. They give up sleep to do it. They miss appointments. They don't go out with their friends, because I do, at least, because I want to finish a story. But you should never think about it as a calling. At the end of your life, when you've published a bunch of stories and a bunch of novels and done really well and became way more popular than I was, you can say you had a calling. Throughout, while you're doing it, it's a hobby. It's a hobby you take seriously because you like to tinker at it, you like to do new things, you devote your time and your money and your passion to it. But don't glorify it by saying that it's a calling. Because the more you put yourself into the role of the writer, the more you do yourself kind of a disservice. You risk you take the risk of trying to act a writer instead of just being one. If you're lucky, what you create will become art. That's what I hope with every single thing I do, that it's going to touch someone, it's going to be transcendental, but I can't decide that. We are craftsmen. Some of us are better than others. We're all still training, but we're still craftsmen. And you should strive to make everything as good as you can, but also accept the fact that whatever you have in your head when you start a book or start a story or whatever else is not what's going to come out on the page. It might be a lot better, it's certainly going to be different, but the sort of pure sort of diamond that's in your mind is possibly, if you're really unlucky, just going to be a lump of coal when it ends up on the page. So rewrite it, make it as good as you can, and keep going. You get better at writing by writing more, not by writing the same thing over. That's important. I can't remember if it's the next point on this slide, but I'll talk about it now anyway. Whatever talents I have as a writer right now have come around because I've written a lot of chronicles. If I'd taken the same chronicle and rewritten it a ton of times, I wouldn't be nearly as good. Plus, you need a bit of pressure all the time. We've gotten submissions for writing, or from writers, I should say, who are asking, can I write chronicles for CCP? Can I do creative projects and so on? And many of those people are really talented. And I remember at least one person who sent in a story and said, this is what I can do, and would you like to hire me? And I said, this is really good, but can you write 3 more in a month? Because that's what it's about. Can you recreate your success again and again and again, or as often as possible, under pressure, under a lot of time pressure, and when you're doing a lot of other things as well? When you're done with the chronicle, the play, the novel, or whatever else, you're going to need to edit it. Nobody gets it right the first time. This is just a truth. Throughout my chronicle and novel writing history and anything else, good edits are worth their weight in gold, and so are editors. And it's hard because you have to put your ego aside. Anything that I get edited, my reaction is usually, for 50% of the edits, I'm like, yeah, that's actually a really good point. That's quite true. And the other 50% of my reaction is like, how dare he say I throw that bit out? I like that bit. It's my favorite bit. And then after After a few minutes of cooling down, I'm like, he's actually kind of right.